Hey, Bio30s, and welcome to our discussion about STI, sexually transmitted infections. Last day I told you we were going to be discussing ARTS and contraception. Sorry, got it wrong. We'll be discussing that later in the unit, though, for sure. But for today, it's going to be STIs, the lovely concept about all these little buggers that can mess around with you if you're maybe not taking the right precautions during sexual intercourse. Again, infections that are transmitted through sexual contact are referred to as STIs or STDs. They used to be called STDs. Now they're mainly called STIs. I don't know. They just changed the designation a little bit. But they're basically broken. The ones we're going to discuss today, there's about 7 of them that I want to discuss today very briefly. There are 4 of them that are caused by viral pathogens, by viruses, and the other 3 are contracted through bacterial infections. So probably should know which are which, and I've got them kind of on the board here listed as to which ones are viral and which ones are bacterial. But in your notes, the first 4 are viral and the last 3 are bacterial, just in case you're trying to keep track of it. Okay, the first one that I'll discuss is AIDS, which is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. We talked about this last year in relation to the immune system unit in Bio 20, and this is basically where the immune system is shut down, and mainly what this virus does, and the virus that causes it are called HIVs. The viruses collectively are called HIVs, human immunodeficiency viruses. These viruses target what are, you may remember, your helper T cells. The helper T cells, which are basically linchpins in the immune system response, that are basically going to recognize antigens and then can basically tell the rest of the lymphocytes to mobilize, start producing antibodies, start getting the killer T cells ready and all that stuff. So without the helper T cells, our acquired immune response is actually very much compromised. So this is a very serious condition if people acquire it. People don't die necessarily from this virus, but they will die from a host of other diseases that are normally our bodies can fend off. But people who suffer from full-blown AIDS might die from, let's say, things like shingles, tuberculosis, pneumonia, meningitis, herpes. These are all normally infections that we, generally speaking, can fight off if we're healthy. But people that have that have an immune system that's compromised because of the disorder are going to be much more susceptible to being infected and being have serious health ramifications, if not death, from some of these infections if they get them. The second one, I again discussed this disease with you last year in Bio 20, hepatitis. There are several forms of hepatitis. The one that I want to discuss today is hepatitis B because it is directly through sexual contact. Did you get hepatitis B? It's either infected blood fluid or bodily fluids or blood. You can get it from both. It can also be passed on to unborn children as well. So people that have hepatitis B, there can be transfer of the virus across the placental, the placenta into the unborn baby, and they can contract hepatitis as well. Hepatitis, as you're probably well familiar with, it attacks the liver, causes symptoms like jaundice, abdominal pain, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, and joint pain as well. There is no cure, but there is a vaccine, so you can be vaccinated for hepatitis B before you contract it. And there are some drugs that can be used to reduce the symptoms as well. There's also, as I mentioned, hepatitis A and hepatitis C. Neither of them are STIs because they are not contracted through sexual contact. They would be contracted strictly through blood only, and water. That's how those forms of the virus are actually contracted. Hepatitis A would be from infected water. Hepatitis C would be from infected blood. So that's why they're not considered STIs. And you might notice as well that these are sexually transmitted infections, but they're not always targeting the reproductive system. These are only contracted through sexual contact. In many cases, these disorders will affect other parts of the body, liver, immune system, heart, brain. They're going to affect other parts of your body, not always necessarily the reproductive system. In some cases they will, but that isn't a requirement for these disorders. They don't have to affect your reproductive system. They can affect other parts of your body as well. Third viral infection is herpes, probably the most well-known or most common form of sexually transmitted infections. There are two types. There's herpes simplex 1, HSV1, and there's also herpes simplex 2, HSV2. Herpes simplex 1 would be your cold sores around your mouth, and then herpes simplex 2 would be through direct sexual contact. These cause blisters and outbreaks around the genitals, so around the genitalia, either male or female. And there is no cure for herpes. Once you have herpes, you've got it. Symptoms simply come and go, and you can use treatments to reduce the severity. So you can take antivirals if you feel like there's an outbreak about to happen, like let's say if you have a cold sore or you get an outbreak down below in the genitals there. If you feel or sense that there's an outbreak coming on, you can take antivirals to basically minimize the virus as it erupts on the outside of your body. The herpes sores mean also an increased risk of other. If you have herpes, it can increase the risk of getting other infections like HIV, because you're creating open sores where pathogens can actually enter the body around the genitalia. So that is another issue with herpes that is of concern. And there can be transmission between the mother and the baby at birth. So if the mother has like a herpes outbreak around her birth canal area on the outside of the vulva there could be a possibility of the baby contracting herpes as it's being born. So in a lot of cases, if a mother has an STI that's affecting the area around the birth canal, they would normally, if they know that, they would pretty much take the baby out by a C-section to reduce or to eliminate the risk of the baby contracting the STI from the mother during birth. There are several examples of this, as I'll go through the rest of these here today. Discussed this one last day with you, HPV, which is called human papillomavirus. It has probably the mildest initial symptoms. It causes genital warts, which doesn't sound great, but overall not the worst thing you can get from an STI for sure. They form around the genitals, and basically, other than that, there are no symptoms. So if you get HPV, you're just going to get some warts around your genitals. The problem with HPV, as I mentioned before, is it does increase the risk of forms of cancer. So because it is a mutagen, right? This virus, when it infects you, will act as a mutagen to cells in the area, potentially in the vagina and the cervix, and even around the anus or even in the penis. Like the penis can get tumors as well. So again, being vaccinated for HPV is a fairly important thing, and there are vaccines for it that are fairly standard vaccines to get early on. So that can eliminate the risk of being getting genital warts for one thing, but also potentially getting cancer in the future as well. The warts themselves, pretty like any kind of wart on your body, you can remove them using cryo-freezing just to basically break the wart off if you contract them. But again, as I mentioned before, HPV, the main issue with HPV is its correlation to increased risk of cancer later in life. Okay, those are our viral STIs that I want to discuss today. The last three are all bacterial, and they're named after the genus of bacteria that causes them. So the first one, Chlamydia. Chlamydia is one of the fastest growing STIs in Canada. The last information that I got, I'm going to give you some stats here. There were 55,000 new cases reported annually just among young women. Young women were more than twice as likely to be infected, but there were 55,000 new cases per year. That was about probably 3 or 4 years ago. 75% of people that are affected, though, do not show any obvious symptoms initially. So initially, you're asymptomatic. Like any bacterial infection, you can treat any of these three, chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis, with antibiotics, because antibiotics will affect bacteria, not viruses. These are going to be, if there is an antiviral medication or a vaccine, you would go that route for those ones, but not all of these have vaccines or antiviral drugs that are guaranteed to work for those. Chlamydia can cause an inflammation of the urethra, which can cause very painful urination, burning sensations during urination, because if you're inflamed in the urethra, the urine goes through that, it's acidic, it's going to really burn as it comes out. So it's very painful in that respect. In women, there's also another danger as well. It can spread to the cervix. It can spread to the oviducts. It can actually cause scar tissue to build up inside of the oviducts and other parts of the female's reproductive system, which can make them infertile. If the scarring becomes heavy and thick enough, it can actually cause infertility in women. Babies, if they're being born with a mother who has chlamydia, they should be C-sectioned out, because if they come in contact with any of the outbreaks in the birth canal as they're being removed from the mother or being birthed by the mother, they can actually get respiratory issues. They can get infections of the chlamydia in their respiratory tracts and in their eyes, and that can be a real issue as well. Gonorrhea, another fairly well-known STI. This one is more likely to infect men, whereas chlamydia is more likely to infect women. This one's more likely to infect men. Causes infections of the urethra in men. If women get it, it can also cause inflammations of the cervix. The rectum can be affected as well. Throat can even be infected by gonorrhea as well. So there's several locations where the bacteria can basically make itself a home. Again, there's going to be a lot of pain during urination, and there's also a greenish yellow discharge that comes out of the urethra, especially in males. A lot of women, when they have gonorrhea, are asymptomatic. Men tend to have, in some cases, worse symptoms than women. This can also cause scarring in women in their reproductive systems, which can cause infertility if it's not treated. It can also spread to the bloodstream and be taken to the joints, the heart, and the brain. So the bacteria can find infection sites in those parts of the body as well. And babies can come in contact with, and again, babies that are born with mothers that have gonorrhea, they should be removed via C-section. That way, otherwise they're going to have issues with eye infections. Gonorrhea will basically come into contact with their eyes as they're given birth if they're being born naturally. If the mother has gonorrhea, that can cause major issues with infections in their eyes. And again, like it's a bacteria, so it can be treated with antibiotics as well. The nastiest of the three bacterial STIs is syphilis. Syphilis is a very particularly nasty STI. It was very rare in Canada until recently. Infection rates have spiked heavily in the last 20 or so years. So syphilis is making a comeback in Canada, not something that we want to see making a comeback in the country. But essentially the disease goes through three stages if you get syphilis. The first one are going to be sores that are going to appear around the infection site. You're going to get some sores, a little bit more severe than, say, you would see with a herpes outbreak. The second one is going to be a rash. You're going to get a rash in your skin, usually on the palms of your hands or the soles of your feet, which is very rare to get a rash. And very, very, if you've ever had a rash on your palms or any kind of, on your palm, it's horribly, because there's a lot of sensation on that. And it's not a good place to have a rash by any means. Then the infection will spread. The third phase, where it gets really ugly, it's going to affect the cardiovascular and the nervous system. This bacteria will go right for your central nervous system, and it can be a real problem. If it gets in there past the blood-brain barrier, there can be some severe issues that occur. Infected people may become mentally ill, blind, lame. Heart disease is another issue as well if it infects the cardiovascular system. And then you can get these large ulcers, like in this lady right over here. These large ulcers. These aren't the little ulcerations at the beginning. These are big ones. These are called gammas, and it can develop on the skin, or it can develop these ulcerations can occur on internal organs. They can actually be internalized inside the body as well. Again, it can infect a developing embryo and give it a birth defect. So if a mother is carrying a child, even before it's born, the bacteria can cross over the placenta, because it can invade the cardiovascular system. It can get through the placenta, across into the embryo, and cause some severe birth defects amongst the baby. And again, like any bacteria, it's going to be basically it can be treated if it's early enough. It can be treated with antibiotics, provided if you somehow come in contact with the bacteria. That is it. That is our look at STIs. There is a handout about STIs. Complete that handout on STIs, and that will give you your complete That'll complete the first half of this unit about reproductive system. Next time, I'm going to be starting my discussion on the second half of the unit, which is prenatal development, the development of the zygote into an embryo and into a fetus. We'll be discussing that fascinating look how basically that one cell after fertilization becomes essentially you and I looking at us right now. So that'll be our topic next time. Until then, thanks a lot for tuning in, and we'll see you then.